Are you nervous about your instrument check ride? Of course you are. Every pilot, no matter how much experience he or she has, is nervous before a check ride. No one likes being evaluated. But just remember, you're well prepared and competent, or your instructor at the CPC would not have recommended you. So think of your check ride as an aviation bonus. You're going to spend some time with a highly knowledgeable elder statesman of aviation. Now, most examiners are not FAA employees. They're long-term members of the aviation community, often with a passion for flying, and they want to promote aviation. Their job is to make sure that you and your passengers will be safe. So relax and enjoy your instrument check ride as a learning experience. By the way, it's not the examiner's job to teach, but you can't help but learn something. And you'll find that to be true through the years on every check ride you take. Now, something else to be aware of. Everyone wants you to succeed, even your examiner. There's more paperwork if you fail than if you pass. So the examiner starts out with the assumption that you are knowledgeable and well-trained, or your instructor would not have recommended you. And he'll keep on believing that, unless you change his mind for him. Now, your check ride actually has two parts: the oral exam and the flight test. And everything you need to do or demonstrate knowledge of for both parts is spelled out right here in the Instrument Practical Test Standards booklet, the PTS, that came in your Cessna kit. Now, here are some tips to help you impress your examiner on both parts. First, plan on arriving early. It'll give you time to unwind and organize your materials, but it also makes sure that the examiner has time to give a relaxed and not rushed practical test. Second, organize the information that you and your examiner will be working with. Now, a good way to do that is by using 3 file folders. One for your pilot information, one for the airplane, and one for your flight planning materials. And go ahead and lay these folders out on the table so they're handy. Now, what should be in the pilot information folder? First, and perhaps most important, the check for the examiner, all filled out and ready to go. Then you'll want the application for Airman Certificate, the 8710 form, and check it over beforehand to make sure it's properly filled in and there are no typos and that the times add up properly. And make sure that both you and your CFI have signed it and dated it. And you'll also want to have your pilot certificate right here and a current medical certificate. And you should have your knowledge test results, and they should be dated within the last 24 calendar months. And you'll need to prove that you are who you claim to be. So you'll need your personal ID with your photo and signature. A driver's license, military ID, or state ID card, or passport are all good for this. Throw in your logbook and any other training records, and you're going to have what you need.
Here's a special tip for staying organized. Get a supply of sticky tabs and use them in your logbook and your airplane's logbooks. They'll make it much quicker and easier to locate the various entries that your examiner will ask to see. Now, what will your examiner want to see in your personal logbook? Well, primarily the entry for your long dual cross country, the one of at least 250 nautical miles with 3 different kinds of instrument approaches. He'll also want to see the endorsement for you to take the practical test to verify that it's dated within the last 60 days. While you're at it, make sure you've signed every page and that the times total correctly. If you're graduating from an approved school, make sure you have your approved school graduation certificate. Now, in the airplane folder, you'll want to have the airframe and engine logbooks and also the pilot's operating handbook. You do not need to bring the airworthiness certificate and the registration certificate in, but make sure they are in the airplane. And make a point of showing them to your examiner when you do the pre-flight. Like you did for your own logbook, use sticky tabs in the airplane logbooks. The examiner will want you to show him the sign-offs for the required airplane inspections. These include the annual, the 100-hour inspection if it's required, the transponder check, and the ELT check. Now, since this is an instrument check ride, the examiner will also want to see the altimeter and static system check and also the VOR check. Now, you should also put a sticky tab in the logbook to mark where the AD compliance information is recorded. And by the way, be ready to explain the maintenance required on your airplane and any ADs that do apply. You might also want to mark in the pilot's operating handbook the current weight and balance information and the performance charts. You'll be referring to both of those during the oral, and you'll be a lot more comfortable if you don't have to hunt to find them.
Now, your examiner will normally assign you an IFR cross-country trip for you to plan in advance. So your flight planning folder should include that information, including the weather for your proposed trip. And by the way, if you study that weather before the check ride, you'll be so much smarter when you explain to the examiner what's going on. You'll also want to have your navigation log completed with alternatives in case the flight cannot be completed as planned. You'll want to have your flight planning information all gathered together. You'll want to have completed weight and balance calculations and IFR en route and approach charts, as well as VFR charts for the trip. And your examiner will want you to explain all your planning and what you were thinking when you did it. Now, here are some additional things you might want to carry along with you. You can carry them just in a flight bag. For instance, the Practical Test Standards booklet, which is the Bible for your practical test, an FAR AIM, an airport facility directory for your area, a view limiting device, either a hood or foggles, a plotter, or flight computer, blank flight planning forms, and blank navigation logs. And make sure that everything is current, especially your charts, both IFR and VFR. And by the way, if there's a GPS in your airplane, make sure you know whether it is IFR certified and whether or not the database is current. Because if the database is not current, be sure to tell your examiner, and be aware you will not be able to do any GPS instrument approaches.
After you've suitably impressed your examiner during the oral, it will be time to go fly. Remember to take the POH back to the airplane, as well as any other airplane documents you may have taken in. And make sure you take your plotter and flight computer, view limiting device, charts, and navigation log with you. You will be the pilot in command during the flight test. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means you are in command. It's your decision, not the examiner's, whether and when to begin or complete a maneuver. This can be a little unnerving if you're not prepared for it after so much time of having your flight instructor tell you what to do. You are also the person responsible for the safe conduct of that flight and for making sure that you're complying with all the federal aviation regulations. The examiner is there as an observer. He will only comment or take over the controls if you start to do something you really shouldn't. Since you'll be under the hood most of the time, your examiner will also be your safety pilot. He'll be scanning for other aircraft and checking for traffic before you start any turns. Make sure you're clear on who will respond to traffic calls from ATC. It is appropriate for you to ask the examiner to hold the controls for a moment while you get a chart or take off your hood or foggles. Just don't plan on using him continuously as an autopilot. I find it useful to give the examiner a running commentary of what I'm doing and why, so he doesn't have to guess about what I'm planning to do next. Now, what kinds of things could have you fail the flight test part of your practical? Well, if the examiner has to take the controls to keep you from doing something dangerous or to get you out of trouble, you will probably have failed the flight test. You will probably also flunk if you consistently fail to meet the standards in the PTS for the maneuvers, or get off and don't correct for it. Notice I said consistently fail to meet the standards. If you notice that you're off and correct back right away, you should be okay. as long as it doesn't happen often. The standards in the PTS are set for a good flying day with plenty of smooth air. If there's a lot of turbulence bouncing you around, your examiner will make allowances for that. The one surefire way to fail is to scare the examiner. You'll be more relaxed and feel less intimidated if you've met your examiner before your practical test. So see if you can meet the examiner ahead of time to review test procedures and ask questions. What kind of questions? Well, ones like, if I'm unhappy with how a maneuver or an approach is progressing, may I stop and start over? Is that acceptable? Use this chance also to clarify the schedule. Will there be a lunch break? Or should you bring some snacks in case you get hungry? When you're assigned the cross-country trip to plan, you'll impress the examiner if you ask for his weight to do the weight and balance for the flight, and if you'll be carrying any baggage. As always, when you're asking about someone's weight, do it discreetly and tactfully. You might also want to ask the examiner which approaches he plans on using if he's willing to tell you which approaches he normally uses. If he will, you'll have some advance notice for organizing your en route charts, area charts, and approach charts for the check ride.
Now, the wonderful advantage you have on your practical test is that you already know all the answers in advance. You know exactly what you need to do to pass because it's all contained right here in the Practical Test Standards booklet.
Your examiner may change the order to make for a more efficient test, but the standards you must meet will be identical to those in the PTS.
And again, remember, your CFI and your Cessna Pilot Center would not have recommended you if you were not ready. So don't get checkitis. Have confidence in your own abilities.
Above all, don't cram the night before. Get a good night's sleep. That will be much more useful to you than any last-minute studying.
Now follow these suggestions and your practical test really will be a piece of cake.